Looks like
Welcome
we're
back,
live.
Josh.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We are live. Yeah, man, it was good. It was a good little break. I was trying to get back to the mic sooner, but I had so much going on this month, and it sounds like you've had a pretty busy month too, handling
I did.
all your responsibilities around the house. My
Yeah,
wife is
that.
actually out of town this
Work.
week. What's that?
I said that in work. Your wife is going to be what?
My wife is out of town this week. She actually it's our wedding anniversary today, and she is helping our daughter move from college to basically her temporary home for the summer. She's going to be working up there in South Carolina. So, and we're down in Florida. So she
Okay,
was,
nice.
yeah, she had to go figure that out with her. But yeah, I got your text
Fun times.
yesterday, and I said, man, I gotta get on the mic with him. I meant to text you Thursday night, so I'm glad you reached out. We I think what we have planned is going to be a fun one today.
I think so.
So what
I
what
think
is
it
the
can be.
first? How would you sum up what you wanted to talk about today?
Yeah, I think a good way to sort of maybe introduce this is just kind of say out loud the fact that a lot of people are wading through their faith and what they believe with a lot of presuppositions, a lot of um, borrowed family traditions, and maybe solidified it with some denominational dogma based on whichever church they attend. It ends up breeding a lot of these cliches and anecdotes, and sadly, a lot of them just they're just wrong, um,
Yeah,
or inaccurate, or they do things like they make they allow you to make your faith more comfortable than Scripture actually does. Uh,
yeah,
it
yeah,
creates a lot of like moral relativism or moralistic ideology that Scripture doesn't really allow, and I don't know, it just kind of simplifies a lot of deep theology into like a fortune cookie slogan, and it just keeps your faith shallow because you're not really digging into it. You're just walking around with these cliches you have memorized, and God helps those who help themselves. If you want to judge somebody for not working hard enough, it just creates this sort of pretentiousness that really isn't accurate.
yeah. I think for the fortune cookie, fortune cookie Christianity is is kind of a good way to let. Maybe that's what I call this one. A
Yeah, I
little
think so.
fortune
That'd be a good title. I like it.
Christian, right? Yeah, and it's not the intention here from us isn't to judge anybody, right? We're not trying to say, hey, we're holier than thou. I'm the furthest one from that, right? I honestly I see no value in it. But I do think that it's an important conversation to have with people that says, hey, no, we're not holier than thou, but man, there's something to having having a faith that's rooted in something real, right? Building on rock, right? And having a faith that's rooted in something that's going to wash away and building on sand. And I think that's the warning, from what I can tell in the book. By the way, I just got through Judith, the book of Judith. Interesting. Have you read Judith lately?
No, I haven't.
Dude, are you familiar with the story of Judith? So this one is one that completely forgot about. It's a honeypot story essentially, right? Where Judith, under Nebuchadnezzar, the the um, the Jews, Israel, is being attacked by the Assyrians and Nebuchadnezzar's army, for the Chaldeans, and it's a warning essentially to the people against turning away from God, because one of the advisors to Nebuchadnezzar's army is that, hey, this people, you can't attack them, you can't take them out because their God is going to protect them. But the only way you can defeat them, and this is why I'm sharing this story. It sounds like, oh, why would you bring up Judith? The only way you can defeat these people is what's told to the leader of the army. I forget his name. It escapes me. I'll come back to it if it brings it to me somehow. But the only way you can defeat this army is if they sin against their God, if they turn away from their God, right? So you just have to know when they're going to do that. And the Jews are at the top of a mountain, right? They're a little stronghold, and the Assyrians cut off their water supply, and the Chaldeans cut off their water supply, and they're just kind of waiting them out. And so, as people are starting to get thirsty in the Israeli camps, they start to get nervous, the Israeli people and the Israelites, and they say, well, give us 5 days, right? The leader of Jerusalem at the time says, God will take care of us, just give him 5 days. And Judith goes to him and says, careful there, right? Who are you to test God? Who are you to give God a time limit, right? He can protect us in his time when he sees fit, right? We just got to trust him is the message. Well, she ends up going in prayer, and talking to God, and she goes to the camp of the Assyrians and Chaldeans as though she's fleeing Jerusalem, and ends up, long story short, cutting off the head of the army that is attacking Jerusalem. Right? He wants to have her for himself in a lustful way. He drinks and she basically seduces him to drink, and she ends up cutting his head off at night, taking his head back to the Israeli camp, and that's how they defeat the army in front of them. It is a wild story, and I was laughing listening to it, going, "This is why people read the Old Testament and go, what the heck is going on here?" Because we forget that time was so. Oh, there's a doggy.
Yeah, there's three of them in the house, so they might be showing up here.
Gotta love it. But we forget that time was so battle stricken, so violent stricken. Uh, we looked around
Yeah,
at
I think it's a good. I've been on this forum in the past couple of weeks on Discord. It's the Christian Ministries forum, and it's a whole different channels you can talk to through, and other like Facebook groups. I end up being in a Lies in Christianity and Atheism versus Christianity Facebook group. I have since left them because it's just full of a bunch of trolls. Like nobody wants to actually discuss anything; they just want to point fingers. But
yeah,
you talk about the Old Testament, and one thing I learned really quickly is nobody's reading it for context to understand. They're reading it to find out where does the Bible say something that I can disagree with, and
yeah,
I just had like I
absolutely.
kept trying to remind people like what the Bible records isn't necessarily what the Bible condones. Like some of this is just historical reference to telling the story of what God is doing, not what God is promoting, right? So
Absolutely. So that's the point of the story to me is don't turn away from God. Trust in God's timing, right? And yeah, well, and, if it means cutting off the head of your enemy versus the enemy, destroying the entire nation of Israel at the time, that's maybe there's a trade-off to be had, right? There's a difference, and I think we've talked about this before, between taking an innocent life, which is what the commandment is against, and then having
right.
to defend yourself against the pursuing army, right? The Israelites didn't go after these armies, right? Because they weren't worshiping their gods, they believed in a god other than Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king at the time of the surrounding areas. Because didn't worship Nebuchadnezzar, they offended the king, and that when somebody comes after you that way, it's the message that I'm hearing a lot of lately, and I agree with it. It's being a strong Christian man doesn't mean being a pushover. It doesn't mean just turning the other cheek. It means maybe you have to braid the whip and throw some tables over in the temple when necessary. And that's what
Yeah,
people
but
forget about
I
in the
mean,
New Testament.
you could, I mean, we could even talk about an entire, probably two podcast episodes of unpacking the Sermon on the Mount. But the whole
Yeah.
thing, even about turning the other cheek, actually isn't really about self-defense or physical violence at all. That the way that's stated, at least for that jargon for that culture, that has to be doing with being disrespected more than physically attacked. If you read the surrounding, because if you're taking a right hand to the right cheek, what are you being? You're being backslapped. So it has to do with being disrespected more than it has to do with physically attacked. But to go back to your earlier statement, it sounds like you would like to bring back beheading. Did I understand that correctly?
There are certain instances. So again, remember, I am not a moral authority here. I am not somebody who should be in charge of much decision making when it comes to crime and punishment. Um, but I mean, there are instances lately where I've thought to myself, yeah, we should bring that back.
I think we have a version of it up here in Pennsylvania. I think South Carolina has it as well. The castle laws, where you can defend what's yours if somebody
Yeah.
encroaches onto your property. Yeah.
Florida, I believe we have the castle law. We're the wild, wild west out here on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Um, and Texas does too, right? I
Of
think there's a
course.
lot.
Of course, Texas.
I just spent 2 weeks in Dallas. Dallas was there's a lot of concrete jungle-ish, right? Very roads everywhere. I didn't get to see much of it. I was working, training constantly, but man, wide open country. I remember being up in the plane looking down, and that is a vast place,
Hmm.
Texas.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah. So the first anecdote, I guess, that we're talking about is that turn the other cheek Christianity. Right. I I understand, that it's an easy message to grab onto, and I believe that the intention that most people have in using it is positive, right? It's don't become reactive to the world around you. And I think that's a good message overall. Uh, I just think that right now that message is taken to an extreme in a lot of cases where it's, hang on a second, and it's this isn't from the Bible per se, but if you uh, you've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything, right? That's the country song,
So we're
right?
going to talk about disimpacting cliches, and you're going to start with a cliche. I like it. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly the
How you
idea,
do
right?
anything is how you do everything.
Yeah, well, that's true too.
Yeah.
But so for me, cliches, baby, let's do it today. For me, the whole idea of I guess it changed for me in the Sermon on the Mount with understanding the idea of the meek inheriting the earth, right? And the fact that if you aren't, Carl Jung talks about incorporating the shadow into your personality, and the shadow is that part of you that's dangerous. And if you aren't dangerous as a man, and specifically as a Christian man, if you aren't dangerous, then you're harmless. Meaning that if you aren't capable of defending what's yours, of taking a stand, right, and so to speak, finding speak of cliches, a mountain or a hill to die on, right? If you're not willing to stand up for something, um, and you can't defend it, then you run the risk of being harmless. So you're not a controlled monster per se. You're a bunny rabbit, right? And a bunny rabbit, unfortunately, is harmless.
I don't know.
But
Have you seen Monty Python? The Were Rabbit was. I think there are some outliers to that assumption. But I
touche.
think you get into something here, and I think when people read the word meek, their head goes to, or their mind goes to the word weak simply because it rhymes. But
Yes,
meek really isn't about being harmless or weak or passive. Meek is really, from the biblical application, is talking about power under control.
exactly.
So to me, it's like you know what you're capable of, but you're not a loose cannon,
Yeah,
and you're going to apply it where necessary and as necessary.
right. Yeah, and that's the Jungian idea of incorporating the shadow, right? The shadow is the part of you that, so it's a part of me that I've been praying a lot about having God really take over, right? I mean, I was just the other day, I have to pray pretty intensely, right? I don't know how it is for other people, but I am a hard-headed, difficult to change individual, and I truly, uh, I I truly want my story to be the best example of the man I should become. Right? So I want what I do to be that. And so I have to bring myself constantly to the altar, so to speak, right? I have to really focus and ask God, come into these parts, right? These are the parts that really need you, because the good guy, right? That guy that I'm trying to be, he gets it, but there are parts of me that need to be completely transformed. And the only way to do that is to give them up to you, right? And so I beg for a new birth, right? And I'm always asking, say, these are the parts that I want gone, right? Come in and remove these demons or whatever they are, right? And so I'm having my prayer time this week, and I'm wrenching my heart, literally saying, I don't want these things. And I don't know if you saw recently, Theo Vaughn had a podcast where somebody had written into him asking about something about this kind of spiritual change. If you haven't seen it, I'll send you a link to it. It was powerful, right? Because it was that same type of idea, and I had heard it. Um, it was funny, kind of came to me through social media channels, but I had heard him wrenching his heart, saying, I want a different story. Uh, and I'm beyond the point where I want a different story per se. I want to live 100% in the spirit that I'm trying to embody. Right, the thing that I'm asking them, saying, live in me and live through me, live in me and live through me, live in me and live through me. And for me, it's that exchange of persons, right? Like, if you accept, and we talk about this in the bridegroom language, if I accept this Christ idea, this Christ being, this God into my life, right, then I have killed him, right? That is the responsibility that I take on, is that I have put him on the cross. So I have taken his life. The second part of that is the part that I have to follow through on. Now I must give him mine. That is the exchange, right? And so I am saying over and over, just to remind myself, right? Take mine, right? I have taken yours. You have given me yours, I should say. So here I give you mine. And that exchange is, I think it's in, is it in Galatians that talks about that we are alive in Christ, right? It's not me, but it's Christ in me that lives. That
Yeah,
to me,
shortly after talking about what you're talking about is digging into those shadow areas is would be, crucifying the flesh, dying to yourself, and living for Christ. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah, and I think that's where, to bring it full circle, I think that's where the message becomes, well, Jesus wouldn't, defend. Jesus wouldn't take up a in battle per se, right? It's that Old Testament versus New Testament, the pacifist Jesus. And I don't 100% agree with that, right? I think we've talked about it. The patience that Jesus had to actually sit down and make a whip. Have you ever braided rope together to make a whip?
Are
Josh,
we frozen? Yeah, sorry.
have you ever braided a rope together to make a whip?
I have
Have you
not.
have you ever seen it done, the actual like braiding process to make a whip?
I bought one from the fair.
Dude, so it is a slow, tedious process. And the
Mm.
Bible says that before he went into temple in the turning of tables story, that he literally sat down. He saw what was being done in his father's house, and he sits down and braids a whip before going in. So it wasn't that he had this emotional reaction. It wasn't that he committed an act of passion. He
Yeah,
thought
it
it
was
out.
intentionality. Yeah.
Yeah, he came out and said, "No, this is not what my father's house is for." But anyway, I know people. I can I can hear people's voices saying, "Nah, that sounds like such a cop out story, right? Like that's not what Jesus was really like. You're just taking one story out of context." And maybe I am, but I don't believe that we're meant to be doormats. I don't think that's what
Yeah, well, no,
the
absolutely. Well, and also, I mean, you bringing up going to the temple and cracking whips and flipping tables, people like to use that as somehow justifying righteous anger. But if you read that whole story, what happened is money changers and people who are basically trying to monetize or get in the way of people's access to God's house. The theological messaging in there is that Jesus goes through and gets rid of the obstacles in the way of people's ability to come to Him. And that's the gospel, like in a nutshell, is Jesus came to get rid of the things that get us out of right relationship with God. And that's what he's doing there in the temple, is not just showing up surprised. He's showing up
yeah.
there to get rid of the obstacles that are getting in the way of people's access to God's house and what they need. Because who comes right after that's over? The blind and the helpless and the hungry. They're the ones showing up now that the money changers are gone and they're not being, profiteered to death. Like so many of today's televangelists, send me your money in a check in the mail and you'll get tenfold back when it's due. And if you don't, it's because your faith isn't good enough. It's it's the same story. It's nothing new, right? So, but yeah, but
Yeah.
even Jesus, when Jesus is sending out his followers to go, tell the story, preach the message about, hey, Jesus is here, this is what he's doing, get them to come. He tells them to take a sword,
He
go get a
does.
rod, take a staff. Because the important thing there is not, we're not justifying an early first century crusade idea, but what we are saying is the message of Jesus was so important to get to where it needed to go. It's like, don't let anybody stop you, and you're going to have people on the way that are going to get in your way. And so you need to be prepared to defend yourself against them for the purpose of spreading the gospel, sharing the story, getting the story of Christ out there. So that was, I don't want to misrepresent that as, we should take up weapons and go and evangelize in the city and shoot
That
people
is
who
not what we're
disagree.
saying here. Right.
That is not. But I'm saying, like, even in the day, they had a job to do, and it wasn't going to be thwarted by any means. So, like, even if for a visual deterrent, the fact that you're armed will make you better able to get where you need to go. That type of thing is, I think we can still hold on to that and say not to be a doormat and don't let your story be silenced just because you're unwilling to stand up for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of, I don't want to say taking up arms to travel, but to be able to bring it back to what I was saying. It's just about being able to defend yourself, right? To not be an aggressor in the situation, but yeah, listen, if you are harmless and you can't defend, you're going to be taken advantage of, right? We see it
Right.
all the time with the elderly, or the. I mean, shoot, look at how many people are taken advantage of day to day, just by people who are sending these fake ass text messages right now and saying, "Hey, you owe the New York City tolls." I get them all the time. New York City,
I do too.
like, what are you talking about, right? If you're not aware of what's going on around you, if you're not capable of defending yourself against an attack, you're. It's not that you're not going to be attacked. You're just going to be vulnerable when you are. But yeah, I don't want to beat that one to death. I just That's the one that stands out the most to me, as far as cliches and Christian cliches are.
Well, it's a part of the conversation as people wrap onto these ideas and these cliches, and they create this sort of legalist dogma out of it, and it goes so far to one side that now it's completely irrational. I've heard people say in that line of thinking that anybody who joins the military isn't saved because, you know, being in the military and fighting and killing and defending your country under some false sense of nationalism isn't biblical. And so I was like, well, yeah, I was like, number one, you're out of your mind. Number two, the Bible is talking about theology. It's not digging into nationalism at all. Jesus doesn't even talk about nationalism. He talks about the kingdom of God. Everything else is secondary. So the fact that people would defend the sovereignty of America in this case, or whatever their country, is a completely separate conversation to their faith. And so they try to bridge together to make an all inclusive conversation and everything is telling the same story. Well, that's just not the case. It's just that's a bridge too far, if we might use another cliche.
Let's tag them on there. We should write them all down today. I feel like there's so much. Let me rephrase that. So many of the veterans that I talk to, that I'm friends with, the people that I know who serve our country, they actually do it out of this, stewardship obligation, this servant mentality where it's a service to your country. That's why when we come across a veteran, we say, thank you for your service, right? And it's a giving of yourself to do something, defend your country, if you're called to it, overseas even, right? But to stand up for those who can't do it, right? Those who can't defend themselves or aren't as capable of it, right? To take on that position is to say, hey, I'm going to sacrifice myself. Uh, what is it? All gave some and some gave all, right? I'm going to give, and if that means that I give you my life in the process, then so be it. That is the greatest act of service, that I can imagine. And so it's hard for me when I hear somebody say something along the lines of, well, if you're in the military, that it somehow negates your ability to be a good Christian. To me, I look at it as the opposite. And I know that it's maybe I'm a weirdo, but it's to me that's the greatest service that you can offer to your people.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem with painting with a wide brush is it doesn't dig into the heart posture, the motivation, right? So Jesus is quoted in saying like, look, whatever so you've done to the least of these, you've done also to me. And he's talking about, helping those in need, feeding the needy, clothing the cold, finding those who are in need and doing something about it. Like when you do something for those people, you've done it for me. So if your
Yeah.
heart posture and like I'm serving my country because I want to preserve the livelihood of my family and my countrymen, that's a different posture than I'm joining the military because I want revenge or I want to murder people in a different country. It's a heart posture. So you can't just put a blanket term on this action equals this consequence because that's just not the case. It's too broad.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, throughout the Bible, it's warned that, and in the Old Testament, to me, I focus on the idea of myself turning away from God, right? When and I'm guilty of it, right? I've spent years. I think I've said it before. I spent years. I was raised faith filled, and then I turned away, and I literally became an atheist, like an outspoken, um, militant atheist. And the Old Testament to me is a warning of turning away and turning back. Right? It's a constant. I mean, speak of it, it's nothing old, right? Or sorry, nothing new. It's all the same story. We keep doing this thing where we turn away. Don't know that. I don't look at the Old Testament from a warlike perspective, not to go down a different rabbit hole, but the entire story is constantly, it's about keeping or losing a covenant with God, and the consequences often become that you come under attack, and you will lose a battle if you aren't focused on the right thing. Right? That's the message to me. Right? It's if you don't stay focused on your relationship with God, you're coming under attack one way or another. The only chance you have in your life to be victorious is if you stay faithful to your relationship with God. To me, that sums it up in a nutshell. Where it's like, okay, no matter what's going on around me, whether things are good or bad, if I just focus on being the best version of me, which to me is equivalent with keeping my relationship straight with God, so that my relationship with the world around me is a reflection of that. It's when I get distracted by the shadows of myself, if you will, right, and I allow my will to take over, that's when it doesn't matter what's going on around me. I can make it worse. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think you summed up the Old Testament cycle pretty good. Is whether it was Nephilim giants, whether it was rebellious angels, whether it was Babylon, whether it was Assyria, the repeat theme was the only reason they lost their way and lost their protection or lost their land was because they didn't keep the covenant agreement with God. They didn't keep their faith centered in who they were created to represent, their stewardship, their imager, right? And then you sort of see a bit of that summed up with what you just described with, you know, Peter and Jesus walking on water. That whole scene, if you could just like zoom out and say what happened. Well, when he was focused on Jesus, the storm didn't matter. But when he got distracted by the waves and the clamoring storm, he began to drown. That's we could put that on a fortune cookie, I guess, if you want. But
Yeah,
that's the focus was every time Peter took his focus off of Jesus, he began to sink. And as soon as he realigned his focus, whatever was going on around him became irrelevant. That's kind of what our posture needs to be, and it's easy. I mean, this life is easy to get distracted because we build ourselves up in this, post-revolutionary industrial age where social media distractions, and we're in a rat race of seeking the American dream, and we work to live so that we can live to work. We've sort of trapped ourselves in this cycle of economic disparity where we're just always running and trying to make it to what? To what end? So we can hurry up and die better than somebody else? I don't know. But again, that misses the focus. We miss the purpose of being an imager. We miss the opportunity to share and love. And what is Galatians 5:14? The greatest commandment that fulfills the whole law is love your neighbor as yourself. We're not doing that very much if we're working 80 hours a week trying to put food on the table and plan a vacation, so to speak. Which, just to clarify, inherently those things aren't bad to
right.
do.
Yeah.
It's just the motivation, the focus. Like, are you carving out time for devotion and prayer and encouragement and generosity, altruism? Like, are you just so self-consumed with that goal that it's taking up all of your time that you might spend doing things for the kingdom?
Yeah. I think that's man, that's a my brain's going down that rabbit hole right now of how distracted we've become. Right? I don't wanna lose focus on the cliches today. Um, but yeah, I think you make a good point there where it's like, what are you focused on? I sat with a large group of people uh, in the month of April, and we kind of created a focus of our lives. And the one habit, and I'll share this because it means so much to me in my own life. The number one thing that we talked about developing, one habit, uh, was the habit of gratitude. And
Attitude of gratitude.
an attitude of gratitude. I found myself as we were talking, right? I was sharing with this group of guys and well, guys and girls. There was a woman in the group too. Let me not be sexist, right? But this group of people, we're all there to get better, And one of the things I shared was a lot of what I learned from Tony Robbins and some other people throughout the years as I've been working on my own life was the most important gift that changed my life was a habit of every morning thinking of the gratitudes that I have. And I heard a question asked one time. I said, if the only things that you could keep in your life are the things that you were grateful for, what could you become grateful for? And now, if you ask yourself, if you frame the question that way, then you can become grateful for everything.
The
I
other side of
can,
that question too would be, how much would you lose? Like, how much are you taking for granted that you're not specifically appreciating that would be gone if you didn't appreciate them?
exactly. That is exactly the point of that question is, oh, wait a minute. If you don't become grateful for your eyesight, as poor as it may be, then you don't get to keep it.
Mm.
And I mean, I'm practically blind without my contacts. I probably need to get readers. My wife and I were talking about it this week. It's like, I mean, that's part of getting old, right? I think we're at that age.
What's that you say?
Exactly, right? We're at that age, and we're young, right? Or at least I like to think we're young. Um, but if you're
I
not
still feel
grateful,
25 in my heart. My body doesn't agree with me sometimes though.
yeah, when I go out and I do too much, right? I do like activities like I was still 25 the next day. My body goes, yeah, how was that? You're
Yeah, and
probably
all of this
better off.
moving back and forth and working, I've said many times in the last couple of weeks, I was like, 42 feels real different than 22.
Very much so. But yeah, so as you're going through that and you're realizing, man, I'm not losing it, but I'm not as young as I used to be. I know for me, it's bringing it back to gratitude. It's a matter of okay, if you're not grateful for the sore muscles, you don't get to keep them, right? So if you're not grateful for being able to limp across the room because you did squats yesterday, then you don't get to keep the ability to limp across the room. Now, you lose your legs, right? And I know it's reductionist and it's absurd, but that's the whole point. Is what are the things that
Well, it's
you're
also the idea of atrophy. If you don't use it, you lose it.
right? And I do believe that the gratitude muscle is something that needs to be exercised, right? And
Right,
so it comes
absolutely.
it even goes so far as to this young man who was I think he was 23 years old, a young guy coming to me. He kept coming up to me, asking me. He really wanted. He was hungry for growth, and he was wearing his cross, and I kept reminding him that that's the thing to focus on, right? Is how do I develop that heart, right? And as we were talking, I understood some of what it boils down to for him is this feeling of I don't want to call it resentment, but this feeling that he didn't get treated the way that he wished he would be treated by his own father. That the expectations and the way that he interacted with the two other brothers were different. And of course that's the case, right? Because we're different people. But he was clinging to this I don't want to call it a woe is me because I don't want to minimize what he was going through, but he was clinging to this deep need and desire to be loved the way that he saw it in his head. In the conversation, as I was sharing with this group, he and I had some heart to hearts privately, right? And we processed some information together. But in the sharing about the gratitude practice and asking that question of what could you become grateful for if the only things you could keep in your life are the things you were grateful for? I looked at him and knowingly between he and I said, and nobody else knew what I was referencing, but he did. And I looked at him and said, if you're not grateful for your father speaking to in a way that you didn't quite appreciate, then you don't get the lesson that comes with that. You don't get the growth that comes with whatever the hardship was, right? Whatever
Yeah.
value that came out of your hardship, you can't keep it unless you're grateful for the hardship. Could you become grateful for the hardship at that point? And that was a moment, he said. He came up to me afterward and he said, thank you. He's like, yeah, it makes sense now. Everything we had been talking about makes sense now. And that's something I had to come to. Tony Robbins shared it. It's when your worst day becomes your best day, your life changes. When you realize
Sure.
the worst thing in the world wasn't the worst thing in the world. It felt like it at the time, but the person I became as a result, the value that I bring to other people as a result, it's something that's I can't be ungrateful for. I have to be grateful. It changes your heart, and it sounds hocus pocus, right? And anybody listening to this would be like, "Oh man, this guy's off his rocker." But man, if you become grateful, if you go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish that thought because that brings us into two cliches that I want to sort of
Yeah.
deconstruct.
So all I was going to say was, if you develop that grateful heart, if you really cultivate the spirit of gratitude, it's not so long after that your resentment goes away, your bitterness and anger goes away, because those attitudes, those emotions, those frequencies can't exist together. So the gratitude brings you to a place of, in my own experience, and maybe somebody else's is different, but of real love, right? I have a quote on my arm. It says "Tu comprends, c'est tu pardon," which I'm sure I butchered. And what's his name? Justin Jones is gonna be like, that's not at all how it's pronounced. Shout out to Mr. Jones. Um, but it means to understand all is to forgive all, right? And gratitude gave me a gift of understanding. Gratitude brought to me a gift of forgiveness and love, because it allowed me to say, hey, if you want grace in your life, you have to give grace. If you want love in your life, you have to give love. If you develop a heart of gratitude, I promise you, as hocus pocus as it sounds, your attitude towards life will shift so far to the positive. And it takes practice, right? It's that muscle that we were talking about. But I promise, like, there are gifts in the practice of gratitude that I never saw coming, right? And I'm not
Yeah, that I
perfect.
mean that gets us to the point where you talk about grace, mercy, forgiveness. These things, and I think it's important to remember these things are free to give away, but very, very expensive to hold on to because it costs you, the person who's unwilling to give it away freely, it costs you a lot to hold on to it and to keep it to yourself and not give it out where you need to. Whether or not people deserve it is irrelevant. It's
Right.
expensive to
Yeah.
keep and free to give, and that's the interesting sort of, I don't know, paradox about it is when I give out forgiveness, it's free to do that, and it's liberating. When I choose
Yeah.
to withhold it, it costs me a lot. Day to day
Yeah.
peace, anguish, it creates resentment and bitterness. Like it stacks up all these things that are very, very expensive to keep carrying around.
And quite
Emotionally
literally,
expensive, if you will.
right. Yeah. Emotionally expensive, but we forget that those emotions, right? Because we think of emotions as these things that kind of drift around. They sit inside of you, right? Emotion comes from motion, right? So the your body, you hold on to these. There are signatures. There are chemical signatures, literally in your brain, of different emotions, right? And so there's a chemical cocktail that you create in your brain, in your body. And raised cortisol with anger and resentment, right? And so it's a stress hormone. And so we forget. We think, oh, it's just an emotional experience. No, no, sir, right? No, ma'am. This is a real physical reaction that you're going to have, and it is, while it is metaphorically toxic to your emotions, it is physically toxic to your body.
Sure.
It actually
Yeah.
it creates a negative experience in your body, and
Yeah,
so
you see that too. Like I do a lot with nutrition and diet,
yeah,
and you see a lot of people who will completely change how they eat, but they don't change how they sleep, and they don't get rid of a lot of stressors in their life. So that cortisol hormone is just it's a fat storage hormone. It's like survival. we got to hold on to all this nutrition in case we need it later. And it's you see it in life. They think they're going to change one thing and it's going to fix everything else, and that's just not the case. Nutritionally, it's not the case. Spiritually, it's an ongoing daily commitment of intentional decision making to. Am I going to fast longer? Am I going to swing by the gas station for a corn dog, or am I going to go home and make myself a steak and eggs? Like it's these are just little micro decisions we make every day, and by the end of the day, we can inventory like, how did I do? Like, oh man, I don't know if that white monster and the cookie dough bites was on the game plan for the diet schedule I had. It's just, you know, but we carve out caveats and permissions for ourselves to intentionally fail, and then we look back at the end of the day and wonder why we didn't make the progress we were looking for. And we do that with our faith, we do that with our relationships. Like, how many times did I intentionally not show up when I had a choice to? And then I wonder why all this stuff is fractured and not where I wanted to be.
It's such a good point. I have one of the things that I develop for people, and I give it all away for free, like we do this, right? Look, I'm not trying to make a fortune doing this. I'm trying to share a story with people. And I create these little courses for people who want to literally change their life, right? Who are actually on a path that is some sort of discovery growth journey. And one of the things that I'm working on right now is something called the Time Master, right? So you bring up how much time are we wasting? So a year is 12 months, right? Now, if you want to learn how to break your year into 4 years, right? Every 12 months have 4 years in there. There's a great book called The 12-Week Year. Go read it. It's fantastic, right? It kind of chunks down the time frame so that you can accomplish more. Check it out. Great book.
It almost sounds like there might be four seasons.
Right, right, exactly. So you
Who
treat
knew?
each season as a year, right? Imagine that, right? But if you have 12 months, how many weeks is that?
52.
52, right? So if you focus every 12 months, right, or each month on bettering yourself, you show up 12 times a year, right? Okay, well, let me reset and improve. If you do that on a weekly basis and you say, okay, all right, this week, how did I do? And you reset yourself, you do that 52 times in the year, right? If you do that on a daily basis, that's going to be 365 times of committing yourself to being the best version of yourself, right? If you compare those three levels, right? If once a month I reset myself and I say, okay, I need to recommit to my goals, to being the best version of me, we can keep this simple. Obviously, the analogy here is how often are you keeping your focus on the right relationship with your God? As far as I'm concerned, right? That's where my mind's going. But 12 verse 52 verse 365. Well, then if you break it down to hourly, right? If you can catch yourself throughout the day and say, okay, wait a minute, am I focused on the right thing, right? Am I bringing the best version of me here? That's 8,760 hours. So if you have 8,760 times that you're resetting yourself throughout the year, you're way advantaged. You're leveraged over that person who's doing it daily, let alone weekly, let alone monthly, right? Well, let's say you get crazy, right? And you can catch yourself throughout the day. And this is again another muscle you have to practice. You have to exercise.
Hmm.
But maybe you can catch yourself in a negative headspace, right? And move yourself into gratitude, right? To bring it back to that every minute. That's 525,600 opportunities throughout the year to bring the best version of you, to bring a practice of gratitude, to catch yourself in a negative headspace. And then if you break that down to the second, because within the minute, you can catch yourself, right, and say, oh, okay, wait a minute, I have an
Yeah.
opportunity here. You have over
Yeah.
31.5 million opportunities if you're just breaking it down to the second to say, oh, wait a minute, okay, cool. I became aware that my head went down a different path, that I wasn't focused on the right thing. And to me, that's massive. I'm sorry to go down that rabbit hole, but when you said that, yeah,
No, it's good
where,
because a lot of people, they'll say they'll wake up late and they'll have traffic and be late for work, and they let that one moment
mm,
define the rest of their day. And aside from all the numbers, what you're really saying is you can start your day over at any time, as many times as
Yeah,
you need to, instead of letting one moment define how the rest of that trajectory is going to look.
exactly. And I think the reason that's important is because we forget that in our own relationship, right? And when I talk about relationship, I'm talking about that, one on one, relationship with God. So I follow this atheist on, I follow a lot of atheists, believe it or not, on social media. And this one girl in particular who, shared about, it's one of the things about Christianity that she can't stand, right? Is that crazy cop out. And I feel, a part of me feels bad for her that she sees it that way. That this whole relationship is what it's really all about. She claims that it's a Christian cop out. It's not about religion, it's about relationship. And it's like, no, it's exactly what it's about, right? I
You should
went down
remind her that Jesus himself was killed by religious people.
yeah. So I'm not trying to change her heart, right? I don't
I
actually
get it.
interact with her. I follow her. Um, and not as a warning, more of a, I can sympathize, right? Let me rephrase that. I can empathize because personally I've been down that mental road, and I'm not saying that I know more than she does. I don't mean to sound like that. Um, but I personally have lived through that mental journey of trying to make sense of religion and God. Because there's a great quote that I heard years ago. I think it was from Bishop Lancelot Andrews. He said, "The nearer the church, the further from God." And the point was, what we're really kind of talking about was the cliche religion, right? The cliche Christianity is what he was. I think that was at the heart of that quote. Is it's not about that, right? The further, the nearer the church, the further from God just means you can get so sucked into the wrong message, this dogmatic approach, and forgetting that it's really about right relationship and choosing. You get to choose, right? What's the verse? Choose this day who you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
Yeah, Joshua.
Josh.
I forgot the verse and chapter, but yes, it's in Joshua.
Yeah, I
That
really
actually is on the list of cliches that we haven't actually gotten to yet.
yeah. Let's jump to the next one, dude. We could be here for the next 7 hours if we wanted
No,
to.
to kind of tie a bow onto what you were alluding to there, I've had a lot of discussions in forums and in person with atheists. Some are militant atheists, like they're just looking for a reason to argue, and some are just,
Yeah, that
I
was
would
me.
say, almost more like agnostic atheists. Like they're not convinced, but they're not aggressive. But one thing
Yeah,
I've found is the number one cause of atheism that I've noticed. I don't want to speak for everybody anecdotally, but
absolutely.
the number one cause that I've noticed of why people are atheists has nothing to do with intellectual scholastic study. It has mostly to do with religious trauma. Most people are atheists because somebody who professed to be a Christian was an absolute jerk, to keep it clean. I mean, they. So sometimes your best testimony, your best way to spread the gospel is to say you're a Christian and then not be an a-hole, to say it plainly.
That's great advice. That is great advice.
But whether it's family, whether it's in the church, whether it's actual abuse, or whether it's just general religious oppression, where they're constantly under the thumb of conviction and ridicule and criticism, you're never going to criticize anybody into relationship. That's just,
No,
and
exactly.
so, and we get in this idea that faith is just an intellectual belief, but the Bible doesn't describe it like that. It talks about, it's not just a an exercise in fundamental believing and mental thought. It's believing faith. The way the Bible professes faith is believing loyalty. It's like you have options and you choose God, you choose Christ. So it's not just I believe there's a God, so I'm going to sit back and put my feet up and be a salvationist. Like, I got mine, so I'm going to ride this out until I die because now my death is going to be better. It's not that. It's believing loyalty. It's like you know that you have options and you're choosing Christ and God as who you're going to put your trust in. So believing loyalty, I think, is a better way to understand faith rather than just mental practice of thought.
Right.
Because we get
And I
wrapped up
love
in these
that.
superstitions, like, if you don't believe in Santa Claus, he's not going to bring you presents, and that's kind of how we're taught that at a very young age, and we just sort of transpose that over to faith. Like, oh, if I don't believe in God,
Right.
then my fire insurance, right, my hell avoidance measure is gone. Well, I don't want to burn for eternity, so I guess I'll just choose this better option. That completely misses the gospel. That's not the gospel message
I
at
agree.
all.
I agree. 100%. And that's actually a great um, parallel. If you don't believe in Santa, well, he's not going to come. And, well, if you don't believe in God, well, he's coming.
He's coming, exactly right. He's gonna come. So
That's
what
actually
which
Pascal's
team are you
wager.
on, right? It
Yeah.
is. It
Yeah.
is. It is
It
Pascal's
is.
wages. Like believing cost me nothing, but not believing cost me everything.
Yeah.
But I
So
also
I'll
think
share
that
this.
that kind of trickles people into a sort of a shallow theology too, of like, well, if I'm a gambling man, I'm going to bet on God. Well, that's not really the biblical narrative either. Although it's a better default position than I'm going to choose the world and do whatever I want, and because that's going to be to your own destruction, regardless. You know.
Yeah. And that was the point of Pascal's wager, right? He was a mathematician, and he was very intelligent. Blaise Pascal. Uh, his point was not, well, better safe than sorry. It was more, well, let's just weigh the consequences, right? Let's think about this. And just for those who are unfamiliar with Pascal's wager, it's the idea that it is you are better off to act as though God is real, and that's really the whole point, right? To not just believe, not like fairy tale, Santa. And I hope nobody listening to this still believes in Santa, but not Santa belief gift fairy tale, but it's really like you're talking about, and your definition of belief. I love that, believing loyalty. If you act as though God exists, you are better off than if you were to act as though He didn't, because the consequences of being wrong on the first hand and the consequences of being wrong on the second have dramatically different outcomes, right?
Sure.
Downsides
So
and
he's effectively saying like, if I live my life as though there is a God, and at least from the Christian perspective, living that out
Mhm.
looks like loving God with all your heart, loving your neighbor as yourself, being generous, being kind, being altruistic. If I live that way and I get to the end and I'm wrong, then it's cost me nothing. Then it doesn't matter because I lived the best that I could.
Yeah.
But if I live in a way that there is no God and nothing matters and I treat people poorly and I have no believing loyalty and I live for myself only and get to the end and find out that I'm wrong, well, now that's cost me everything. Because if this is
Right.
an eternal consequence and this life is just a blip on the eternal timeline and everything you do in that blip matters, then it costs you nothing to believe and choose Christ and live as though that is the truth and treat people the way Christ did. And if we're all wrong about it, then who cares? You are a really,
Yeah.
really good person.
Right. What did you lose? Right. And that was a question. So I used
Right.
to argue as a militant atheist, I would argue against Pascal's wager as a poor intellectual exercise. Because I put truth, right? This is a messed up game I used to play. I said that the truth in reality is more important than, safety in consequence. Uh, and, part of me does believe that, right? And gratefully, I came back to where I began my journey, right? Thank God, quite literally, that I did, because I was more concerned with truth than being right. I just didn't see it right in front of my face, right? I was blind. I was the blind man at the pool, right? I couldn't see what was right in front of me, and I did want it, right? Meaning I did want to see the truth, and I needed to understand that as me. not as what I felt was put onto me as a child. So grateful for that. Um, but to me, it was okay. That's a terrible reason to be a Christian, right? And because I misconstrued. Yeah, there he is. I misconstrued the
Sorry.
Pascal's wager for the longest time. Oh no, you're good. Um, I misconstrued the wager for a long time. But I'll walk you through kind of real quick the wager that I gave myself was I went down this atheist path for a good while, right? I didn't just dip my toe in, so to speak. I jumped in head first, and at one point, I to relate it to diet. At one point, I went into a new year saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to see what happens." Right, my New Year's resolution was, "How would my body feel if I ate all meat, and nothing else?" Right, this is how I went down
I
the
did
kind
this.
of yeah.
I did this
So
also.
I did. This is how I and I'll bring it back to faith. I promise. But I did it for January, and I felt so amazing that I did it for February, March, and I continued it 5 months straight. All I ate was meat, ribeyes, right? And it was amazing. Um, I was never more energized. I was fitter than I lost so much body fat. I was
Hmm.
lean. I felt healthy. Like it wasn't like I was strong, right? I was working out all the time. Um, it was amazing. So I continued it. Well, not the following year, but within a couple years, I said to myself, I said, all right, I'd been, atheist for a long time and had been, my wife, when I met her, she was like, "You're not an atheist." I'm like, "What?" I was so offended. Like, what are you talking about? I'm not an atheist. How dare you say I believe in God? But she said the same reason Peterson says you can't act out the proposition, right? You can't actually behave as though there is no God. And so I started to look at my own life and where I was struggling and where I wanted to be better and what my personal demons, if you will, were. And I said, okay, well, what if I live this next year? And Jerry and I actually in the original podcast talked about this, and I decided to live my life for 1 year. I said, okay, what if you live this life as though God exists? I took Pascal's wager, but twisted it my way. And I said, what if you live this next year? Right, give it 12 months. Yeah, exactly. Of course. But what if I give it 12 months and I say, I'm going to live my life this year as though the proposition that God is real is true. I'm just going to see if my life improves. And would you know it? My life was better that year. Meaning I was better that year. And so during the course of that year, in the first about 6 months or so, I approached my birthday is the end of June, and I approached my birthday and I realized, okay, if you are this much better acting as if God is real, why don't you look back at your life and think of when were you at your best? When was the best version of Stephen a reality in the world? And I realized it was when I was practicing my faith, meaning I was walking the walk. And I said, okay, well, maybe do more of that. Bring that version of yourself into the future. And this is the sacrificing the dead wood in myself. How do I burn off what needs to be burned off and live in the best version of me? And I was still in this agnostic atheist space where I wouldn't quite say, all glory to God, right? I was holding on to that one. Um, and I went to a seminar. This is the craziest thing. I go to a seminar. It has nothing to do with religion, or so I thought. I go to this seminar, and it was a professional development, all about becoming better personally and work wise. And somebody at the seminar was talking about Christ, was talking about Jesus. And this just so happened to be in this crazy year of mine, right? And I literally sat there And I was like, okay, I put myself here, right? And I didn't know this was what I was walking into. But it just so happens to be at this right time in my life. I'm not going to treat this as though it's some stupid coincidence. I'm going to take this seriously. If this is your message to me, right? And listen, if you're listening to this, yeah, it sounds stupid, okay? I don't give a flying behind, right? Like, I don't care. It happened in this order. And so here I am in the desert, nonetheless. I'm out in Phoenix, Arizona, in the desert in Fort McDowell, right? Just blazing heat. Right? And this is all I'm literally thinking this through and going all these biblical references of 40 days in the desert and right, and I'm going, man, is this how you had to get through to me? Right? Okay,
Right.
I'm open. Okay, now I'm living as if I'm recreating this idea of, okay, bringing the best version of me. And then I get this message that's like, yo, hey, listen, I don't know where you are, but if you're in a position where you're thinking about giving your life back to Christ, back to this Jesus, you should do it. And I literally sat there, tears just rolling, right? Writing out all of the parts of me that I was ready to let go of. And I was like, okay, I'm yours. Have me. I don't understand what just happened, but here, this is if this is my chance, take me. And that was my turning point where I was like, I am dumbfounded at this reality right now, right? I could say my mom calls them God winks, right? It's those small
Yeah.
coincidences
Yeah.
that God doesn't want to take credit for. Um, but I give him credit in that one, where I sat in this moment and I said, "Oh my God," quite literally, "Oh my God, like what have I done?" And it was my prodigal son moment of, okay, I'm gonna give myself back, and that was a few years ago, and I've become more and more willing to say now I don't know where I fit in relation to the world and its hierarchical structure of denominations. So I don't know, right? I was
I don't think
raised
it
Catholic.
matters. I think those denominations are a man-made construct for organization and control.
Yeah, I agree. I used to call the Catholic Church the company, right? The corporation, right? And
Sure, probably still
I
is.
yeah, I don't mean to be disrespectful to those who are. My parents are Catholic. Like I said, I was raised Catholic. I believe the intention is good, right? And for the most part, and it does give structure to us, right? Um, but I don't think it matters either, right? I think what matters is, can you see, and this is how my heart changed in the process of growing up, I guess, right, in my adult years, is can you see the wisdom? Can you see the value that this structure brings to the world? Don't take that away from the people who not only need it but use it, to better themselves and to grow their relationship, right? And so that's why I backed off of demolishing religions at first. I was like, oh man, you're just being an a-hole, like you said, right? Don't be don't be that. But that was kind of my road to Damascus story, if you will, right? It was.
Yeah, well, that can, you know what, that can get us into one of the cliches on the list here is like everything happens for a reason. And the reason that's on the list is because while that is certainly true, I think it's better to say like everything happens the way it's supposed to. Uh, and sometimes that reason has nothing to do with you, although you might be involved in it somehow. But most people try to like latch onto this to give themselves some comfort in suffering. And from the Bible perspective, we're never promised to understand the reason. I mean, you look at the book of Job. His life is annihilated.
Yeah.
And he's lamenting and complaining like, God, of all people, like, why me? Why me? It's all very, introspective, very self-centered. God basically shows up and says, you don't have the cosmic picture. So sometimes we're going to suffer, and may not be a reason that we understand why. But our call is to have faith and trust, even without a full explanation and a full picture. So that's one of the cliches you kind of sort of segued us into is while everything does happen for a reason, we're not always going to know the reason.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that ties into there's the quotes, and it's in the New Testament, but it actually is pulled from the Old Testament. I forget which book. I'm going through, like I said, I'm going through the book cover to cover, right? The Bible, and it's the message that I have a plan for you, right? I have a plan, and for your essentially for your success, right? Not for your downfall. My plan for you, God's plan, right? Because that's what the cliche gets into is people talking about, well, it's God's plan, right? And I hate the answer when I hate that answer when somebody says, "Why did so and so have to die?" Right? What to wrap our heads around death as Christians, as people in general, as human beings, is a challenge. And when bad things happen to good people is a great book. I actually had my daughter read it. It's by a rabbi, Harold Kushner. If you're ever looking, if you're ever going through something, or you know somebody who's going through something that's challenging, that's a great book to look to. When bad things happen to good people, like I said, the rabbi who wrote it, it's very good. But the whole idea of, well, this bad thing happened because it's God's plan is so, and I think it's right in line with that. Everything happens for a reason. I think it's a mistake, right? I think that trusting in whatever God's plan is a good thing, but to not realize that, the plan wasn't always for suffering to be here, right? Suffering is a part of our life because of the story of the fall, right? Because
Sure.
this is our condition. It's not that God said, well, you're going to have to go through this, right? Unless you're Job, right? And technically, that the story isn't even that God did that, right? God said, no, I trust in his faith so much that you're not going to be able to turn him, right? And the
Well,
point is,
the accuser, right? The accuser shows up and basically challenges God's sovereignty. It said the only reason Job loves you is because you bless him, and so he,
yeah,
the message we have there is like God's like, all right, that's not how this works. So I'll prove it to you. Do your worst.
yes, and
Really crappy for Job.
yeah, it's really, man, because go back and if you haven't read Job in a while, go back and read Job and realize, oof, that brings us to the idea of, I just read this week. If you could take all your problems, write them on a piece of paper, crumble it up, and put it into a fish bowl, right? And everybody in the world does that. Would you risk reaching in and grabbing out somebody else's problems? I don't know that I would, right? When I look at what
I
my
would.
problem,
I'm familiar with mine. I'm comfortable in mine. I don't want somebody else's. I got to learn it from scratch.
the devil you know, right? The devil you know is better
That's
than
right.
the devil you
That's
know
right.
is another cliche, right? Well, that's the whole idea there. It's like, oof, I don't know that I would trade my problems for somebody else's. I see what, especially shoot driving around, especially in Florida, driving around, you look around, you see some lost souls. Right, that's what my wife and I look, and we're driving around and we see these areas where there are people who are really struggling, and God, I wish I could save them, but I don't even have the beginning of an idea of how, right? And I'm not judging, right? But driving in traffic and you see these people talking to themselves, going through the mental health, drug addiction. Who knows what they're going through? God, I could go down that rabbit hole too. It's seeing their suffering. It's painful, right? It's painful as a human being to look and say, "Oh man, I can't imagine what they're going through." But the point is, I wouldn't trade my suffering for their suffering. And to bring it back to the cliche is, I believe that a better way to look at it is every a reason happens for everything, because that puts the responsibility back on me. So when I see, and I think this is the attempt that people make in turning a suffering moment towards God, right? As an atheist, I used to always say, well, you can't give God the glory for the good things if you don't give him the responsibility for the bad things. Well, if you take that everything happens for a reason and turn it into a reason happens for everything, then when something happens, you don't have to be reactionary to it, right? It's more of a personal responsibility to create a reason. If I see something bad happen, I can say it's because God doesn't love me, right? We pray for things all the time, and when they don't come to fruition the way that we see them or want them or yearn for them, then we can say, well, God didn't give me what I wanted. That's one
Well, I'm
way
going to
of.
put two things in here. I'm going to interject two things here. Sometimes the answer to your prayer is no, and we don't like that. What was it? Was it Garth Brooks? I thank God for unanswered prayers.
I literally just
But the other side of that too is we need to remember that from the human condition, we're processing what we are absorbing as good or bad from a very subjective human perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we say bad things happen, right? For instance, I have a friend of mine. He he had a heart attack, right? Which we would say that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But it was a mild heart attack. It wasn't the widowmaker. It was some other valve or aorta. He actually drove himself to the ER and walked in and said, "Hey, I think I'm having a heart attack." And
I'm
he was
not,
saying the
I'm not
media, of
laughing,
course.
but I am.
Apparently, that's a secret, by the way. You go into the ER, say you think you're having a heart attack. You don't have to wait there for 3 hours, apparently. But the heart attack that he had got him into the hospital that he otherwise wouldn't have gone to, and in the process of doing all that testing, they found out that he had early stage colon cancer. And they caught it so early that they removed the tumor. I don't know if he had to remove like a portion of his colon, but what I do know is that it was so early that he's alive today and thriving. He's going to retire soon. If he hadn't had the bad heart attack, they would have never have found the worst cancer. That's what I'm saying. Like when you process things as good or bad, they're very subjective and they're very relative to where you're at in life for a moment. You know, getting in
Yeah.
a car wreck is bad, but if your broken leg and going to the ER finds out, hey, you have the beginning of lung cancer, but it's stage one. We can go in there and grab it right now. Was it
Yeah.
bad?
Right.
And the other question you have to ask yourself is, was it God? I think
Right.
we, I
The
think
God one.
we put too much emphasis on this sort of mysticism, like a plane crash and one person dies, right? Well, everybody dies but one person. Well, the family of that one person is like, oh, God is so good. Like, what about the other 300 people on the plane? What are they supposed to say to that? So I think it mischaracterizes ascribing things to good or bad as God or not by doing that, because we make it so emotional and so reflective relative to where we're at in our own presuppositions, and we forget that.
Yeah. I think that's one of the challenges of being human, right? We're trying to understand something that is so much bigger than ourselves. And that's the idea of trying to understand God too. But there's a great story, and I'm trying to find it here. And I don't want to ruin the story, but basically there's a man who there's a man who has a son, and they keep horses. And one day they have a horse escape, right? The one horse that they have, they're going to try to sell for food, and sell to get money to buy food. And the horse runs away one day, and his son comes to the father and says, "Oh man, how unfortunate! God, the one thing that we had, to provide for the family is gone." And the father's response is, "We'll see." And so the next day, a few days later, all of a sudden, coming towards their home across the land is that horse that had escaped, that had run away, with a whole load of horses. These wild horses are running into their new pen, right? And neighbors come by, and now he went from having one horse that ran away to having dozens of horses, and so now they actually have a way to make their livelihood. And the son comes to him and says, "Oh my God, this is so amazing! What a great thing! Now we actually have so much that we can make money with." And the father's answer is, "We'll see." And then one day, the son, that week, they're trying to break some of these wild horses to make them able to be ridden. And the son gets thrown from the back of a horse and breaks his leg. And the neighbors come by and they say, "Oh my God, this is terrible. Your son is your only help. And now he's got a broken leg. That's a terrible thing. Now the work's going to be twice as hard on you." And the father's response is, "We'll see." And then the country goes to war, and these generals come on horseback to the house, and they say to the father, they say, "We need your son to go to war. He has to go to battle. We need people on the front lines." And they see his son, and he's got a broken leg. He can't even walk. And they say, "Oh, well, since your son can't walk, we can't take him." And people come by, neighbors, and they say, "Oh my God, you're so blessed. What a great thing." And the father's answer is, "We'll see."
I like that.
We never quite understand what we think is good is sometimes bad, and what we think is bad is sometimes good.
Yeah, I
And
like that.
it's just yeah. It was a great story that I heard, and I said, okay, yeah. The whole point is whether if you believe that everything happens for a reason, you're going to see everything however you're predisposed to see it, right? But if you can create a positive reason for anything, right, a reason of gratitude, a way of being grateful for what you have, then now you can create a positive reason for whatever happens, right? You can say, okay, well, if I didn't have this, right, and this just happened to me recently professionally, if I didn't have this challenge right out of the gate in my own story, I would be of less use to the people around me, right? They would look at me and
Sure.
say, well, of course you could do that, right? Of course you could come out and be a hero right off the rip. And it's like, no, thank God that it didn't unfold that way for me, that I had to overcome some obstacles early on. And then people could look and say, oh man, he overcame a challenge to begin with, right?
That gets us to another cliche. You
Yeah,
ready?
which one?
I hear it all the time in church circles. God will never give you more than you can handle.
Yeah,
Absolutely false.
yeah,
What I wrote down, the point of reference for that was in 2 Corinthians. Paul is talking about being so utterly burdened beyond their own strength that they despaired life itself. But then later he goes in and he says what? That burden, it happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God. And
yeah,
so I think the better way to phrase that would be God will never give you more than he can handle.
absolutely.
If you tell somebody who's suffering and destitute and they're broken down, you look them in the face and say, "Hey, keep up the good fight. God's not going to give you more than you can handle." What are you doing? You're saying you're relying on yourself, which
Yeah,
is completely counterintuitive to the biblical message of relying on God.
yeah. I I think that's one of the most important cliches to hit on, right? Because I it's not that I hate that saying. It's that, like you
No, I
said,
hate it.
it's backwards,
It
right? What's
is.
that? What'd
I
you
said,
say?
no, no, I hate it.
Yeah, yeah. Right. You should hate the things that need to be hated, right? Yeah, it is so backwards. It is because I can't handle, in my own experience, I can say there's a lot that I can't handle, right? Most of life's challenges, most, if not all, temptation, I can't handle. That's the prayer. Live in me and live through me. Because I know that I'm incapable of handling the challenge and temptation of my own will, of my own being. But again, as Galatians says, it's not me who lives, but he who lives within me. That, and this is the weirdest thing, coming from a guy who, listen, if if we had in-depth conversations like this a few years ago, like Jerry Rendering and I used to have, this is a complete shock, right? It's like, okay, Stephen had a traumatic brain injury, right, and became this dependent being because that wasn't my identity. But it literally is, okay, if I look to, and I want to keep this as open as possible to people who aren't at the same point in the journey. But if I just look to something outside of myself that is greater than me, right? In certain 12-step programs, they call that a higher power, right? If I can turn to a higher power, and I can trust in that higher power, in that, and I call God, I can get through anything, right? I can get through anything, but it's not because I'm able to handle it, but it's because of the Spirit within me. It's that thing that is responsible for my existence. That is the thing I should keep my focus on. My God, like, it is so important to remember that. And so I'm glad that one tied in here because, yeah, could you imagine some of the challenges that you've gone through in your own life? Could you imagine going through them by yourself?
Well, that gets us to another cliche. You ever heard anybody look you in the eye or look somebody else in the face and say, God helps those who help themselves?
Yeah. So,
Completely,
all right.
completely against Scripture because that actually doesn't come from the Bible. It comes from Ben Franklin. And if you read the biblical narrative, you're going to see that God repeatedly shows up for the helpless. Romans 5 tells us that Christ died for us while we were still powerless, while we were still sinners. So if he didn't show up, that turned into a very works-based sort of working out your salvation through, if I help myself enough, I'll be deserving enough of the sacrifice of Jesus, or I'll earn my way into good graces. The entirety of the New Testament contends against that very moralistic legalism sort of ideology. Because Jesus said, Paul says in Romans, like, Jesus died for us while we were still sinning. Like, not, all right, once you get good enough, once you sin little enough, then you can come into, grafted into the adoption of sonship. But that's not what the Bible says. Like, while we were sinners still sinning, Jesus died for us. He comes for the powerless, not because we did enough, but because he is enough.
So I think that, God, again, this is why these cliches were important to talk about. I firmly believe that the intention behind it, behind that saying, is good, right? The whole idea, and I think it's easier if you think of it this way. God can move mountains, but you have to bring the shovel. Have you ever heard that?
I have.
So
That
God can
cliche is
move.
not on my list, but I feel like maybe it should be.
No. So here's why I think it's a better way of seeing that cliche in particular. Now, there are a couple, what I believe are prerequisites to that idea, right? And that the main prerequisite prerequisite is you have to ask, "Thy will be done," right? You have to have your sights set on the thing at the top of the hierarchy, right? In this case, God, the kingdom of God, right? The seek ye first the kingdom of God, and then all these things shall be added unto you. That's the command. That is the call to action for us, is to set our sights first on the kingdom of God, right? And its righteousness, and then all these things shall be added unto you. That's the real way to look at this cliche, right? Throw the cliche out and say, hey, wait a minute. Stay focused on the right thing, and then everything else will come. I think it's a better way of thinking about it than God helps those who help themselves. But the idea of God can move mountains, right? If you're depending on him, if you're relying on him, you're staying in the right relationship, you're going to have to bring the shovel, right? You're the hands and the feet. right? But you have to remember that that is what you are the hands and the feet. You are the body, right? We are the body is really what it is, right?
Sure.
We are,
The only reason I
we are,
think that, the only reason I would push back on that just a little is
yeah,
when you're
yeah.
talking
Pushback.
about
Give me some pushback because it's a double-edged sword. So
it
talk
is.
to us
It's
about
another
the edges.
cliche.
Yeah.
The only reason I would say that is um, when you use that mindset towards, I think it has to be situational and conditional. Because if you were to say that to somebody who doesn't have hands, they're like, "What am I going to do with a shovel?" You know, and I say that a little tongue in cheek, and I don't mean necessarily from a physical disability, but there are some people who are broken, so broken down that the idea of having to show up and dig anything for in order for God to move is too overwhelming. And the truth is, God's going to move whether or not you move or not. Um,
Right.
and I think that's
That's
that's sort of the point is God is not waiting on us to do anything in order to enact His plan. Now,
right.
I like to think of it, and I could be wrong. It's just how I associate it in my head. Is this whole faith experience and life experience, this human experiment, is kind of like a choose your own adventure book, where the
Yeah.
beginning and the end are the beginning and the end are set, but your experience within those pages has everything to do with the decisions that you make. And sometimes in those cases, decisions are made for you, like you're at the whim of consequence. And I just don't think that it paints God into the proper posture that we need to hold him in to kind of keep him subjected to our situational consequence or wherever we're at in life. Our chapter in life doesn't say as much about God as it says about the world we live in, the brokenness we live in, decisions that we make that we need to take responsibility for. Um, because we can wrap this up into another cliche that we often hear, which is follow your heart. And we feel like, oh, well, God made me, so if I follow my heart, then I'm following God's plan. But um, Jeremiah, Jeremiah says very explicitly, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. So we need to always measure heart and mind and challenge what our heart feels. Like, is this a good idea? And do it the other way too. Like you get so wrapped up in your head, like how is this affecting my heart? Am I doing things that are good for my heart or for the other person's heart that I'm trying to affect? But the heart can be deceitful because it's easily manipulated. So sometimes we lead ourselves into bad situations because we followed our heart without filtering it through our rational thought process of like, is this really a good idea? Am I acting emotionally? Am I acting rationally?
The biblical call to action is to create in me a new heart, O God. Right? I believe is that
Right.
Psalms, right? Um, now, you follow your heart if your heart is aligned properly, right? And
Right.
that is the real challenge. Is
Which
well, I've
Paul
got
actually addresses in Romans by saying, for believers to be transformed by the renewing of their what?
right
Their mind.
their
So
mind,
you got to do both.
right? Yeah, do not be conformed
And
to
I think
this
you said
world.
it on our very first podcast. The longest journey is the distance from the heart to
Yeah,
the mind. Right.
from the head to the heart, right? And that's
That's right.
another cliche, right? But it's so true. Now, I think that there's value in the idea of the God help, or I think the message, right? The intention that is valuable in the idea that God helps those who help themselves is that let's take, for example, your health, right? Let's remove the stumbling blocks of God for a minute and realize that, okay, if you pray to be healthy, um, but you sit on your butt watching Jerry Springer eating Cheetos, you're not helping yourself, right? So that's the intention, right? There is a personal responsibility in taking the right action, which again, I think the prerequisite is being aligned with the right intention, right? You
Sure.
in your head and your heart, you have to be aligned with the thing, right? So in that instance, speaking of hierarchies, at the top of the pyramid is personal health, right? Physical and emotional, right? Because emotion, we talked about a little bit. But like at that point, that's where the health is at the top of the pyramid, right? And so it's like, okay, the actions you take if you're aiming at the right thing, are going to be different than, if you just believe that, well, you know, I can just pray for it. I can just have, quote unquote, and this is the misnomer of, I can just have faith that God will take care of me. And it's like, well, that's why people say, well, God helps those who help themselves. Remember, you have to be in alignment with Him, which means you have to take, if you are in alignment with God, you also have to take certain actions. I think that's the value that people are trying to lay at the feet of a cliche, if you will, right? But yeah, it's a challenge to understand that, hey, listen, I've got a personal responsibility to act here. And we can, if you cling too tightly to the idea that, God helps those who help themselves, I think that's where you can go down the rabbit hole of misinterpreting what was meant to be well-intentioned. I think all of these cliches are well-intentioned.
I think so. I think just what I'm saying for the purpose of this podcast, for a theological perspective, what I don't want
Yeah.
people to think is God is limited by what you choose to do or not to do. That's all.
Yeah, that is
There's some
absolutely
people.
the,
There's some people who just cannot help themselves. It's just, you know.
and that was actually where I made a mental note and then I lost it when you were talking.
At our age, you got to
I've
write
been
this stuff down.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got papers here. I just forgot to write it. No, I'm just kidding. So, what I was going to say was, I've been in that place where I've been so broken that there was nothing that I could do to help myself. And I think that is the most important thing to remember is that God helps those who can't help themselves as well. Right? It's
Right. That's
man,
that's part that misses. I think it's too shallow of a statement. Is all.
I agree with that, right? And I think that's probably the more important point to make, or the reminder to send out to those who need it at that point in the journey is that no, sometimes you just gotta lean, right? Lean on Him, right? And there's so many references in the Bible. Lean not onto thy own understanding, right? There's so many ideas of, listen, there's a great song, and I don't remember who wrote it, but it's a country song that says, "We are glass." And it talks about how we are shattered and we are broken. And we are made by the light that we let through us, is a lyric that I remember that blew my mind, right? And it's like, if you think of yourself as a shattered vase put back together, right? The potter and the clay, right? The idea that doesn't matter how broken you are, there is a force, there is a thing, there is a being out there who loves you as you are and can put you back together, and you don't have to do anything, right? Meaning you don't have to bring your action to it, you don't have to help yourself. There is a thing, and that I firmly believe, and I think that message is important to the person who needs to hear it. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Well, here's another one then. While we're on this topic, have you ever heard anybody tell you that God wants you to be happy?
Yeah. So that's exactly where I was going to do. I was like, yeah, you know what? It's right in line with the idea that God wants you to be happy. Man, talk to me about that one.
The
Yeah.
Bible, the Bible just doesn't say that, and it's not that God wants you to be unhappy. It's that the purpose of the Bible is conformity to Christ, and holiness, and being a stewardship of the imager that you are of Christ's character. You're not always going to be happy about it. I mean, you're just not. Jonah was very unhappy with his assignment. He did not want to go to Nineveh. Why? Because he knew that if he showed up and told them about who God was and what He could do, that God would show them mercy. And he didn't want to show them mercy. He begrudgingly took that task. He wanted God to kill them because they're terrible people. He goes, I don't want them to be redeemed.
After they're redeemed,
So
he
Jonah,
complains about it.
yeah, he goes and whines and pouts.
He's like, well, why did you waste my time and send me here if you weren't going to smoke these people?
Exactly. But my point was, Jonah was, although begrudgingly, he was obedient to God's task. He was not happy about it. And there's a lot of stuff, the Bible talks about, take up your cross. Jesus said they're going to hate you because they hate me first. They're going to say you're going to endure tribulation and trials. Run for the hill. Woe for those who are pregnant. Like, all this calamity is going to come to you if you choose to follow me because they hated me first. That doesn't presume happiness. That presumes that even in the midst of pain and discomfort and trial, and the purpose is that you seek to conform closer to the character of Christ, to reveal God's character in you for those who need it, to see something different in you than they see in the rest of the world. And sometimes that's not going to bring you to a happy place. And God says,
Yeah.
do it anyway.
Because to me, in my mind, right, if you think of, okay, God wants you to be happy, right? And you're talking about, okay, well, there's going to be struggle, right? You have to take up your cross. The idea in the Buddhist tradition that life is suffering was something that I was able to come to peace with through Buddhism. This idea, because, and Buddhism being a philosophy, not a religion, right? That's a confusion that a lot of people have. But the whole Christ suffering idea was something that Buddhism helped me marry in my mind, where if I take up my cross willingly, right, willingly, and not begrudgingly, then I can actually have this joy in the Lord, right? So, and that was an idea that blew my mind for a minute. The joy in the Lord, my joy in the Lord is my strength, right? How do you take up the cross? Do you come to it, like we were talking about earlier, with a heart of gratitude and saying, listen, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you even made me to be here. I'm grateful that I get to live this life, right? And what I've heard before is you go from I got to do this to I get to do this, right?
That's right. That's right.
Happiness is shallow, right? Happiness is surface. What's going to make you happy? If you're walking on a long journey, then you might be happy to sit down. But if you sit down for too long, then your legs are going to start to cramp up. So now what you thought was going to make you happy is causing you pain. And so now you have to get up and stretch and walk again. Right? And so happiness is fleeting. If the purpose of life is to be happy, I've got bad news for you, but you're on a losing journey. You're on a mission that's
Well, and it's
impossible.
relative. It's relative. You talk about somebody walking for 3 hours complaining about the journey, but the guy in the wheelchair would love to walk for 3 hours. So
Exactly. Yeah.
these are all relative experiences, but I think what you're getting to is joy.
Joy. Right.
It's
That's
finding the
the big.
gratitude even in the unhappy, difficult moments.
Yes. And realizing that now, let's take, for example, because I do want to dig into this idea of happy. I don't think we were really created to be happy. I think we were created to contend with life, right? To overcome challenges, right? That is why neurologically we are wired to chase goals. We are goal oriented, right? And in order to accomplish our goals, the call in the Bible is to seek ye first the kingdom, right? I keep coming back to that. But if you put yourself in alignment with God, then your pursuit of the right goals will bring you joy. I always say, and I said it to these guys that I was talking about recently, my ability to be of service to other people is the greatest joy in my life. So if you want to talk about something that develops real gratitude within myself, it is the ability to be of service to others. And it doesn't make me happy. Sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes it's a real difficulty. But the joy, not happiness, but the joy and fulfillment, which brings peace, right? That is found for me often through challenge. Does that make sense? You're muted.
I think it's a very 21st century Western sort of lazy assumption that things that are challenging and difficulty can't be fun and good. We just kind of had this notion that we're so entitled that anything that requires work or anything for us requires effort uh, must be miserable, and that's just not the case.
It's not. I think it's the opposite, right? If Tony
Yeah.
Robbins talks
Imagine
about
at
this.
the end of your day, I can even tell you right now from experience, if I get to the end of the day and I've done very little, and I think, oh, this is going to be a great day, I'm going to rest and relax, by the end of that day, I am so irritable because I accomplished nothing. Nothing challenged me into being productive or producing. Maybe that's a man thing, maybe it's a human thing, but if I'm not productive or overcoming something, by the end of the day, I'm like, what did I even do? I should have just stayed in bed.
So there's exactly right, and it often feels like that. Like when I do, well, let me speak from personal experience. I went through depression, right? Like most people, I've been through periods of my life where I felt depressed, and the lack of movement forward contributed to the negative feelings, right? It is a feedback loop that spirals downward because in a state of lethargy and apathy and all of the negative emotions that encompass what depression feels like, and it varies from person to person, but all of those emotions are only made worse by doing nothing, by laying around like you think you feel you need to, right? I just need to do
Yeah.
nothing. It's the, oh. Now you're just sitting in the sludge, right? You are just sitting in it, and it's only going to make it worse. Whereas just by getting up, making your bed, and beginning moving forward, making progress, right? Not perfection, right? That's another cliche, right? Progress, not perfection. That is actually one of those things that is positive, right? It's like
I
I
actually
just
like
need
that one.
to. I do like that one. I like that one a lot, right? Because it's about aiming at perfection, but making progress toward it, right? And that's what I'm talking about. The movement towards a goal is what we're made for, right? To bring it back to the Bible, to biblical references, the idea is to become the thing that you strive to become the judge, so to speak, meaning not judging, but the judge is the perfect being that you put at the top of the hierarchy, the thing that you strive to be. Well, when you fail to be that, that's your judge. That's how you hold yourself accountable. Well, I want to become more and more like Christ. And if that's the case,
You're
then
actually describing you're describing the Bible word for what you're describing is called sanctification, which
100%.
is an on and off process of trying and failing to become what you already are.
Yes.
Right? You're
Yes.
trying to it's like a stock market chart. You're going to have step forwards and step back. It's a process,
Right.
progress, not perfection. But
Yeah.
again, you're talking about aligning yourself with the will of God. You're talking about getting yourself rooted in Scripture. Then
Yeah.
that adjusts your aim. So you're constantly aiming
Yes.
towards becoming what you already are.
Yes. And I think that's an important, the aiming, right? Because sin is to miss the mark, right? When you aim, you set a mark and you say, that's the target I'm trying
Yeah.
to hit. And so sin isn't, and I think this is an important distinction for people to make. And I know we talked about what is sin, right? And I'm sure it'll keep coming up. Right? But it's, okay, I'm aiming at the target and I'm off. Now, you could be making progress, but missing the mark is the reference. And so that means, okay, my failure to hit the mark is my sin. And I can, if I can pick myself up in my progress and keep moving towards it, then that is what I'm called to do. And so the aim of life is to become more and more sanctified, right? It's sanctification. It's more and more in alignment with my creator. And when I take my will back, right, to loop in a lot of what we've already talked about, when I take my will back and I believe that it's, my job to help myself, I am going to fail. I'm going to miss the mark even worse. And it's when I turn my heart and my mind toward the thing, uh, toward God, that I am more likely to hit my mark. Because again, it's back to that idea of a spirit living in me, the one who lives in me, not myself. I mean, it's
You
how
know what I think sort of promoted this sort of the psychological apparatus that you're describing of having to start from the beginning every time you mess up?
what's that?
Video game culture. 90s era video game. You're playing Mario or a Contra and you only got 3 lives before you had the code. Like you get halfway through the level and if you die, you start all the way at the beginning.
Right.
Crazy.
Right.
But then you
Right.
know what? We progressed into PlayStation with memory cards, and as long as we remembered to save, we didn't have to go back to the beginning. We had to back to our save point. Now
It's
video
funny
games
that
are at
it's
the point
called
where
saved.
where it's an auto save feature. When you reach certain checkpoints, it auto saves, so you get to start back where you messed up, and that is kind of what we're talking about. Is you don't always have to go back to the very beginning of what you went to. Start back at where you messed up and go from
Yeah.
there. You don't have to
Yeah.
go all over again. You learned a lot. You achieved a lot. You're not wiping all that clean to say, oh crap, I got to start this over from the beginning. Like no, go back to the most recent save point where you
Yeah.
messed up and start from there.
That's a
That's the
great
process of
analogy.
sanctification.
I think that's such a good analogy for especially for people our age, right? Because
Yeah,
we
yeah, exactly.
remember. Yeah, yeah, that's great. And it's funny that it's called saved, right? It's like, yeah, where would
Exactly, exactly.
that it's good. That's a good point to make, right? You're not erasing everything, right? But what you're doing is you're bringing to the altar, so to speak, the sacrifice of of yourself, right? So bring yourself, bring the best version of you, and take all those other parts and line that path, right? And that path would be that path back, right? And the whole idea is, for those who don't know, you would actually, in covenant language, you would split animals in half, and the animals that weren't burnt on the sacrifice were actually lining the pathway to the altar, and so you had one side and the other, uh, and you would walk to the altar. You would bring the unblemished sacrifice, bring the good sacrifice to the altar to be burnt and sent up to the heavens. The idea there is
Because
that,
God is a big fan of smoked meats and barbecue.
yeah,
Big time
listen,
about that.
that, that's we're in alignment on that one.
That's right.
But yeah, and fats, right? The good fats. That's what he's really after.
The original burnt ends.
Yes, but the idea of the animals that are sacrificed aligning the pathway to the altar is that if I break this covenant, shall be like these animals, cut in half and no longer alive. And that is the mental promise. So if you just think of it in a symbolic language way, that's what you're doing. You're trying to bring the parts of you that don't move you forward toward God and lay them out as a reminder for yourself. It says, I don't have to bring these into the future with me. I can erase up to the last save point, right? And I can come with a contrite heart, right? That's the whole idea of wringing your heart before God, right? Wrenching that heart. And I do this. I rend my heart. And I say, it's yours. I don't want it anymore, right? I want your heart in mine, right? And that for me is, God, it is an emotional experience over and over again when I bring myself to that point of prayer, and I beg for the change. And I mean, the good news is it becomes easier and easier. Um, but in my own life, I can, I look back at my own lost path and I say, gosh, without being overly self-piteous, it's very much man, the damage that I caused to the world. Help me, not undo it, right? But help me be something different in you. Um, anyway, yeah, that's
Help it
my
mean
own.
something. Help me learn from it.
Yeah, yes, make me a new creation.
Yeah. So that kind of segues us into the final cliche that I think is worth discussing because I hear it all the time. You hear it all the time from people that are believers and not believers. Judge not.
Judge not, lest ye be judged. Right?
Yeah, I think that people apply this when they're when they already know they're doing something wrong. But I'm not going to be accusatory. Um, judge not really. So a couple of corrections. We are absolutely called to correct one another with gentleness for those who are fellow believers. Like if you say that you're a Christian and you're treating people in a way that doesn't support that claim. I have every obligation as a fellow believer to call you out and pull you aside. Do it in gentleness and love, right? But correction, discipline, that's all still there. Um, so, but a lot of people want to apply judge not as a sort of blanket statement where we're not allowed to use any sort of moral evaluation, or moral discernment. But that phrase is really talking about hypocritical judgment. It
Yeah.
sort of goes in line with pulling the plank out of your own eye. And
Right.
it actually teeters on what we talked about in the sin podcast is we're all sinners. So if I'm judging you because I find your sin more comfortable than my own, then I'm a hypocrite because I'm just saying I'm uncomfortable with what you're doing. Do more of what I'm doing wrong, is less of what you're doing wrong. It's that type of hypocritical judgment. And the second part of that is, let's say you're looking at a group of unbelievers. They have no idea what the Bible says. Don't judge them based on a biblical standard that they have no idea that even exists. Like you're holding them up to an etiquette that they're unaware of. So that's an unfair judgment. But moral discernment is still very much brought to bear here. And one thing I like to bring up when I talk about that judge not is holding yourself accountable to the standard that you promote. Model the way type deals. I have my oldest daughter. She used to be in food service. I'm not going to say the restaurant, doesn't matter, but because I've heard from a lot of people in the food industry, and it's kind of ubiquitous, is the worst people to wait on in the food industry is the after church people on Sunday. And that is that's crazy to me. It's egregious. Like all the people that are supposed to be stewarding the character and the love of Christ are the worst people to be around on a Sunday afternoon after church.
It's the
That
same
and they should be called out for it. They should be absolutely called out. Like you profess to be a believer, and you are treating people like absolute garbage. You
Yeah.
need to have your bell rung.
It's the reason, and we've said it a few times in different, here today, we've said it before, but it's that Carmen quote, which I actually went back and listened to a bunch of the old Carmens that my wife was like, this is crazy. Witch's Invitation, This Blood, it's some good stuff, man. I listened to Champion. That one was amazing. That one brought me to tears, actually. Do you remember Champion? The boxing
I
match?
don't. The only one that sticks out to me is Satan bite the dust.
Satan
That's
bite
all
the
I can think
dust. Boy, last tenderfoot to talk that big, we sent him home in a box.
of.
Man, yeah, I listened to
Man,
that one again
I got to
too.
go back and listen to that.
Yeah, dude, I'm gonna send you some links. I got them. I got them saved in my Apple Music. But what I was gonna say is that brings me back to that idea that Carmen says at the beginning of the DC Talk song. It's the greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, but walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world
Sure.
simply finds
Yep.
unbelievable, right? And it's so it's the challenge of the call, I should say. The call to action is to be a living example, right? They will know that you are Christians by your love for one another, and it is by your fruits that you are known, right? It's so
Well, that's
what
another good
is
song
what's that?
that you brought up singing. It's somebody just redid it, but it's "They'll Know We Are Christians by Our Love" is an actual song, but it just got
Is it a song?
redone by.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
have to
and
look.
it's really good. Who's
I
singing
think
it?
it, I think it's such like that. I mean, that's literally the point of going to church on Sunday, right? It's to now not to go down a crazy rabbit hole, but so my friends who enjoy things like microdosing mushrooms or ayahuasca, right, and these mind-altering drugs, the purpose of taking a quote unquote trip like that is to be able to come back to learn some lesson on your journey, if you will, and then come back and bring something better to the world that you live in. It's not to live in this psychobabble trip, or not psychobabble, but
Right.
this psycho-altered state, right? The whole point of, and it's the transfiguration metaphor. It's, you can't stay on the mountain, right? Jesus says, no, we have to go back now, right? Um, we want to stay on the mountain. Well, it doesn't even seem like we want to stay on the mountain, right? When we're talking about being the worst crowd at a food and beverage establishment after church, it's like, dude, by the time you get to the parking lot, you got people who are already acting as though they never set foot in a church, right? Or that
Yeah.
church is the only
Yeah.
place to be a Christian. It's like, no, wow, we missed the boat on that.
Well, we missed the boat on church, period, but that's a whole different podcast.
Yeah, we'll go there, right? We'll introduce
Michael
that one
W.
right there.
Smith, sorry, not to interrupt, but they'll
I
know
love.
we are Christians by our love as Michael W. Smith. Check it out.
Yeah, I'm gonna check that one out. I love his music. I remember when we were growing up, the Columbine shooting. "This Is Your Time" was a song that really made a big impact on a lot of my peers back then. But yeah, the whole idea of not living right, not realizing that the whole purpose of bringing yourself to the altar, quite literally on Sunday, is to then go back into the world and be a living witness, right? It's like, wait a minute, man. Like, we recently had I recently had an experience with these people in Dallas. We'd ordered food late night, and I had been talking to them all week about bringing a heart of love to every interaction, professional interaction that you have. When I go to speak to somebody who's asked us to come out and professionally, before I knock on their door, I think to myself, I love this person, right? And so I bring that energy to me, and I say, okay, I'm here to love them in service. They called us because they have a problem. My job is to discover what the problem is and whether or not our solution fits. And so I'm preaching this to these young men, and they're hearing it, right? They're amening as well as I'm preaching, right, if you will. We
Yeah.
we have pizza on the way to us. We order some pizza late night as we're studying, preparing for the next
How is
day.
pizza in Dallas?
Well, I forget, we ordered like Domino's or something, right? It was late night, so I didn't get a real
That's not
pizza.
pizza. Never
No,
mind,
it
carry
wasn't.
on.
It was one of the Domino's, or I think it was Papa John. No, it was whoever has a buy one get one, right? Or that
I
might have
was in
been
like I was in Jersey for a week, and
best pizza in the world.
after being in Jersey for a week, if you talk
Yeah.
about Domino's, that's very close to blasphemy, to be honest.
Yes, listen, I hate Domino's. I won't order Domino's. But they had Uber Eats had a buy one get one going, right? And they were like, "Yeah, I would just order some Domino's." I think that's what
I'm
I
sorry.
hate.
Go ahead. You were talking about preaching, love your neighbor.
You'll get
Apologies.
me stuck on hating Domino's for an hour now. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but the whole idea was, yeah. So we have this pizza coming, and I'm preaching this heart of love and everything, and we're sitting here studying, and the food just keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and they try to call the guy and they can't get through. It keeps going to voicemail, and finally I take, it was my buddy Colin's phone, and I was like, "Give it to me." He's like, "We're gonna take the tip off," and then I was like, "No, wait a minute. That's anger, right? Let me let me not be that version of me, right? That's the reactive version." I said, "No, you know what?" I call him up, goes to his voicemail, and these guys are baffled by what happens here. I call him up. It goes to his voicemail, and what do you expect somebody in the middle of the night who's ordered pizza and now has been delayed from one delivery time to 30, 40 minutes later, right? They've already been waiting for the pizza. Now it's almost an hour later. You expect them to be angry and yell at you. And I thought to myself, that's not going to work here. And I said, "Hey," as his voicemail picks up and goes to the beat, "Hey, we ordered some food from you, man. I hope you're okay. I hope you didn't get lost. I hope you didn't get in an accident. I hope you're all right. We're just checking in." Hang up. Within 30 seconds, that phone is ringing. "Hey guys, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Listen, yeah, I'm out here. I'm running. I'm coming to you. I know the address. I didn't get lost. I didn't get in an accident. I'm good. I'll be right there." So our time got cut by 10 minutes. He cut out the next delivery, brought our food to us like that. And only because, I guarantee you, only because I didn't come at him attacking him. I came at him out of concern. And these guys' minds were blown. They're going, oh my God, this is what you're talking about, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's
You
exactly.
personified exactly what you were preaching.
Yes. And
And
so, and,
the
and
fruits were available immediately to see the difference.
that's what they were like. This is insane. I was like, this is what I'm trying to. Now, it just so happened to align that way, right? It's like it could have totally gone a different way. It could have still taken 20 minutes, but they saw and they were like, "This that was amazing." That, and I was like, "Yes, when you can catch yourself, right?" And I was like, "I'm no guru, right?" And I'd been preaching that the whole time too.
Yeah.
I was like, my initial reaction, I called it out in front of them. I said, "What was my initial reaction?" Was to be an a-hole, right? To get resentful. Then I was like, wait a minute. It's in the middle of the night. This guy's working his butt off trying to run these food to these people like us, right? It's like, okay, patience, man. Deal with this guy the way that you would want to be dealt with if you were in his shoes
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now.
Because
And
the only
it
people
did.
calling for pizza at midnight are people who didn't plan better, or they're drunk and they're hungry. So
Yeah,
that's a
like,
good lesson.
yeah, and it was a beautiful thing for us all to see, and to us all, and we were like laughing about it because it's like, yeah, man, that's what coming at something with the heart of love, and that sounds like such a simple example, and it really is, right? It's just like, man, how are you going to treat people? Are you going to pop off at somebody in the middle of the night who's bringing you food? Like how? What a small problem to have. What a small problem to have, and if you're living in your anger over something so small, you've got to really look deeper. And that was how my meditation practice began for myself. Was I realized that I was so angry in traffic, and I had to accept the fact that there was a disturbance in me that I needed to confront. Right? And speaking
Yeah,
of,
you're not angry in traffic. You're just angry, and traffic is activating it.
exactly. And that's the whole idea of the
Yeah.
cup, right? If I walk across the room and bump into somebody and spill
Yeah.
coffee on my shirt, it's because coffee was inside my cup. Like, what's in your cup?
Hmm.
What's in your cup will come out.
Right.
And so I am proud of the fact that, in that moment, what was in my cup, I was able to put my hand over the first cup, right? And say, whoa, no, what comes out is what's in you. And the consequences of what you give, right? What you sow, you shall reap.
Hmm.
Was a line
More
from that.
cliches.
But back to judge not though, right? The whole idea of judge not, to me, when people say that, I think they mean, take the plank out of your own eye. I think you're right there, right? The whole call of judge not is lest ye be judged. So by the measure that you judge, you shall be judged. But 100% we are supposed to discern between good behavior and bad behavior, especially in relationship to our fellows, right? It is as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens another man. That means you're gonna collide with each other, right? And hopefully,
Hmm.
if you're my friend and we need to have a challenging conversation, the Bible actually talks about this, right? If somebody has sinned against you, you are to call them out. You are to go to them in private, is the instruction that Jesus gives, right?
Hmm.
And it's
Yep.
not if somebody offends you, right? It's not if somebody said something you didn't like, right? The whole idea is if somebody actually sins against you, you go and you speak to them in private. And then if you can't make peace, what do? You
Bring two
bring
more.
in somebody else, right? You bring in another member of the community, and you're looking for somebody with wisdom. You're not looking for somebody who's on your side, right? It's not to gang up on somebody. It's to
Impartial third party.
exactly. It's to speak truth together, right? Because where two or three are gathered in my name, right? It's you speak truth together, and as iron sharpens iron, it comes back to that. Now you're going to grow together, and then if they won't listen, even then you bring them before the community, right? In private, right? Now, not the whole community. You don't gossip. You come together as a group and you talk it out, right? And that presupposes that you have a community of people who are willing to look at each other honestly and say, no, this is our failing here. No, that's not the best version of the self, right? And yeah, there are times when I'm the one who needs to be called out. There are times when I'm the one who needs to sit and listen to a dispute, right? There, that is what the whole point of living in the body is to begin with, right? Like, why do we have support groups that are so successful? Because we need to lean on each other, and we need to be called out on our BS. You know, if
That's
my
right.
behavior isn't, what's that?
That's
Would
right.
you, yeah, if my behavior isn't the best version of myself, I hope that I have people around me who can look at me and say, "Man, you don't want to say that. Is that really what you mean? Like, do you?"
Yeah, because if you're only surrounded by people who are going to co-sign your misbehavior, you get really confident and comfortable continuing down the path of misbehavior.
Yeah, and that does nobody any good, right? It doesn't do you any good. It doesn't do the people around you any good. Yeah, I think that's a right now the way that the world climate sits. It is it's so interesting that this judge not has become, not to get too controversial, but this judge not has become a this tolerance practice is the thing that
Hmm.
concerns me the most
Right.
that I see in the world right now, where it's like, wait a minute, you know, we are called to stand up for what is true, and you aren't doing, and I actually believe this, besides not doing anybody any good by just co-signing their bad behavior, you are actually doing harm to somebody you
Sure.
love by co-signing it, right? You're doing worse. It is damage that you're doing, rather
Well,
than,
anybody who's been a parent for toddlers to teenagers knows that part of loving your children is disciplining them, and that means teaching them that
hmm
if I have a 5 year old and he thinks he's a Ninja Turtle, it's cute because he's five. If I have a 35-year-old who thinks he's a Ninja Turtle, then we have some problems. We're going to have a conversation and maybe some therapeutic help because there's a disassociation for reality happening there, and that's is
right,
being able to have that appropriate, age appropriate, situationally appropriate conversation. But correction and truth needs to be the bedrock of any of that. Um,
absolutely,
Now you don't need to tell your 5 year old like, oh, you're stupid. Ninja Turtles aren't even real, you know. And by the way, while we're at it, there's no Santa Claus. Go to bed, get out of here. Like it's
yeah,
that's not very nice, and that's not the right way to handle that. But if if you, but the other, but you know what? It speaks to the other thing. If you placated that behavior so long that 30 years later he still doesn't know that Ninja Turtles are a fictitious thing and he can't be one, then you failed him by not judging the situation correctly and discerning the situation to impart knowledge and wisdom and teaching to say, yeah, that was fun, but we need to talk about what the truth is. Like, you can still enjoy these things, but it's a cartoon, you're a human being, yada yada. You know, this just, we judge things all the time. It's called discernment. It's called, critical decision making. So we should do that for each other and say, hey, you probably shouldn't do that second, third line of cocaine. I mean, that's an extreme case, but the point is, if you're sitting there doing lines off a toilet seat in the bar, and I don't say, "Hey, I'm concerned for you. I don't think this is a healthy decision to make," and you look at me and say, "Hey, judge not,"
judge.
well,
Wait a minute,
you've misrepresented the Bible there. Actually, you're
my
doing lines of
judgment
cocaine off
here,
a toilet seat, so maybe you're not worried about what the Bible says. I don't know.
my judgment here is that this is a bad idea, right? Like, come on, regardless of whether or not you want to be judged, you need to be judged in that moment. And it's funny. So,
But
but I looked up.
correction.
Um, right, you need to be correct there. But so discipline, the word discipline, I pulled this up because I wanted to get it right. It comes from the Latin, meaning instruction or training, right? And so discipline isn't
And disciple.
and decide. Right, exactly. So that's another word from the root, and the whole idea is
Right.
you need to be trained on on how to follow the right way. Right. We're talking a lot about alignment today, right? And it keeps cycling back in naturally into the conversation. It's like, okay, discipline isn't me saying you're doing wrong. It's me showing you how to do right. Right. And so learning what not to do is tantamount to learning what to do. Right. And so in the beginning, right, and if you look at the Old Testament this way and the New Testament, what you realize is that in the beginning, everything that is told is prohibitive. Right. There are instructions given, and there's a lot of prohibiting. And it's because that's what you start doing with a child. No, no, don't touch. Don't, right? You begin by saying, these are the things you don't do, right? And if you can eliminate things that you shouldn't do, what you're doing is narrowing the focus on what should be done. And then the New Testament story is this is what's to be done. Follow me. I am the way, the truth, the life. Right? These are the fulfillment of the law. Right? The purpose of the law is to narrow the scope of, because you have an infinite number of possibilities before you when you're deciding what actions to take. Right? So you have to narrow from infinity. Right? And part of that process is the training, right? Is the discipline of knowing, okay, these are the things that are not to be done. Now you have this narrower array of things that can be done, but they still lead to what seems like an infinite number of decisions to make. And then with the New Testament, with the example from Christ, it's this is the thing to do. Now I have if I can see the existence, my existence as floating in this vast empty darkness, right? The chaos that God creates from in the beginning of the Bible, that void and chaos. Imagine I'm floating in that, and that is my experience in life. If I keep my eye on the light in the darkness and I keep moving towards it, that's the whole idea. Right? And that's the metaphor that for me made sense. That was the thing that I could
And
visualize.
to bring it back to earlier what we were talking about, that light in the darkness would be synonymous to keeping your eyes on Jesus in the storm.
100%. Yeah, same exact thing, right? It is exactly the same. Like, no matter what's going on around you, no matter where you are, you have to keep your eye, keep your focus on, again, it's probably one of my favorite verses in the Bible, is to seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, and then all these things shall be added unto you.
Yeah, it's funny. That's a good preemptive verse that precedes what people like to quote as whatever you pray for will be given to you, like it's a
Exactly.
genie, like it's a lottery. But
Right.
the preceding verse says, align your heart first with the kingdom of God. And that presumes that then whatever you pray for is in alignment with God's will. And that's what you pray for will happen because you're praying for what God already wants, what God
Yeah.
already requires. Not
Because
a new
the
car
verse you're
or,
the verse you're talking about that follows is the one that says, "Take no thought for tomorrow, for sufficient unto the day are the evils thereof." Right. So, and that's the whole idea is, yeah. So you can get into the hippie Jesus, right? And that was why that became such an important verse to me. Right? You get into the hippie Jesus, and I don't know if that kind of aligns with God wants you to be happy, where it's like, live and let live, everything's gonna be okay, right? It's like, hang on a second. The first part of that verse of, everything's going to be all right, the lilies of the field, the birds, right? The first part of that is seek ye first. Keep your eye on Christ, no matter what's going on around you. You start there, then everything falls in line. Now we forget
this
that
is
part.
just creating the important point of not cherry picking parts of the Bible.
Yeah, yeah, it's so important,
Yeah.
right? And I think the most important part when it comes to judge not is remove the not. Judge yourself, right? Start there. Judge yourself, right? As the admiral, I forget who the admiral was that wrote the book, but start by making your bed. If you want to change the world, start by making your bed. Right?
Sure. Yep.
If you,
And the other thing too is you're never going to judge people to Christ, right? So if you're out here and your neighbor, let's say your neighbor is clearly not a believer, and the standard that you're holding them to is a biblical standard. Well, that's not fair. That's like me giving my son a test on a subject he's never studied. And
Right.
so you will love more people to Christ and then let the Holy Spirit do the internal plumbing, as it's called,
Right.
right?
100%.
You're never going to say, hey, you're going to hell if you don't believe in God. And they're like, what? What am I doing wrong? You know, it's an
Yeah.
unfair standard for somebody who has no idea. And also, they don't even know if that's true.
Yeah. It, we don't know what journey people are on, right? And that's why the whole point of this podcast for me is to share something that might help somebody in their journey. I don't know where they are. I don't know where you are. I don't know if you're listening to this, right? I don't I don't always know where I am in my journey, right? And so the whole idea is, okay, I often say, and part of my journey back, if you will, was we underestimate the plight of other people. So we look at our own problems, right? Talking about throwing our problems into the fishbowl and taking the risk of taking somebody else's out. Well, we all think that what we're going through is so challenging. And we forget that the journeys that other people are on are going to present them with their own challenges. And I used to pray, right? There were things that I wanted in my life, and I used to pray for these things, right? And sum it up as a miracle, right? I needed a miracle in my life. And the message that was shared to me was, if you want a miracle, be a miracle. And I looked and I said, well, there's so much in my life that reflects speaking of cliches, that hurt people hurt people. And I realized, well, the hurt that I caused other people was where my greatest pain comes from. Still, right? The hurt that I caused to other people, the evil inside of me that I allowed to act out, that is the largest, the part of my heart that is regret filled, right? Or was regret filled, I should say. And I would turn that over, right? Over and over again. I would keep turning that rock over, trying to figure out, well, what does that mean then? And I came to the conclusion that, okay, if you want grace, if you want forgiveness, if you want a new life, a new heart, that's what you have to be willing to give. And so,
Yeah, give it away first.
yeah, and that was what I had to come to, is that, okay, if you want grace, you have to give grace. If you want peace, you have to give peace. If you want a miracle, you have to give a miracle. And it's the whole idea of, you got to become the thing that you want the most, right? Be the change you wish to see in the world, right? It's attributed to Gandhi, right? That's what we're called to. I think that's the Christian message, right? If you want Christ in the world, you have to become Christ. And again, I don't know why.
I
Maybe
think be the miracle.
be
I
the
think be the
miracle.
miracle actually came from Bruce Almighty.
Yeah, it actually does, right? That is in
Yeah.
that movie. That is
Mhm.
that is the message, right? People need a miracle. Be the miracle. Right? Be the gift in somebody's life, right? And all of a sudden you realize that when you take that stance, that heart posture, the miracles that you see around you are numerous. When you develop a heart of
Well,
gratitude.
yeah, you'll find what you're looking for. If you want to
Yeah.
find a reason to be offended, you want to find a reason to be angry, you want to find a reason to be sad, you can find those things. But if you want to find a reason to be happy, you want to find a reason to feel grateful, you want to find a reason to be at peace, you can find those too. People, as we've seen, at least over the last generation of what that we've lived, is people always have a tendency and an ability to find exactly what they're looking for. You just got to
There's
shift that focus.
100%. It's all about your focus, and there's a saying that you do not see the world as it is; you see the world as you are. Dr. Wayne Dwyer talks about this. I know he's passed away now, but he used to tell a story. He was walking along the beach of Malibu where he lived, and as he's walking, he sees this couple, and this couple recognizes him on the beach, and they come up and they speak with him, and they're from somewhere out east, New York, Chicago, and they say to him, oh, after they're talking a little while, they say, he asks, what brings you out here? They say, oh, we're looking at potentially moving here. He says, but could you tell us, you live here, what are the people like here? And Dr. Wayne Dwyer says to him, he says, oh, well, what are the people like where you come from? And this couple says, oh man, it's, everybady's so selfish, right? There's nobody who really looks out for you. The people aren't loyal, they backstab, they talk behind your back. It's just not great. And he turns to them and he looks at them and he says, I believe you'll find a lot of that around here. Oh, okay. And they walk away disappointed. Following weekend, he's walking along, he's taking his walk again along the beach, and he sees another couple, a different couple this time, and they come up, and they're also from somewhere out east, somewhere in Chicago and New York, something like that. They get into conversation, and he asks them again, so what are you guys doing out here? And they say to him, well, we're thinking about moving here. We love it, it's beautiful, but you live here. What are people like around here? And he asks them the same question. He says, well, what are people like where you come from? He says, oh man, people are great. You develop some really close relationships. They're honest with you. They're going to tell you the truth. They're a joy to be around. Just really great people where we're from. And he turns to them and he says, I believe you'll find a lot of that around here. And his message to both couples was the same. What you seek, you will find. Right?
That's right.
The way you see people is the way you're going to see people. You're going to find a lot of what you're looking for. And that's about that brings it back to that idea of your alignment. Like, what are you seeking? What are you looking for? And again, I know I keep bringing this up today, but that's why the call to action is to seek ye first that, because that's what you're going to find. If that's what you've got your sights set on, if in the midst of the storm you're like Peter, looking at Christ, focused on the right thing, yeah, your shawl got up and jumped off right there.
Yeah, I think somebody came in, so they're going to investigate the door. I have three house alarms.
3 house alarms.
Yeah, 3 dogs. There's 2 dachshunds. The shawl was a Yorkie mixed with a Bichon Frise mixed with a Shih Tzu.
Yorkie, Bichon, Shih Tzu. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, listen. Yeah, she did. She needs a haircut, right? Do you give haircuts to your dogs?
Yeah, not this one though.
Yeah, that one doesn't need a haircut.
Now
you've had that one for a long time, no?
Yeah, we rescued him over 10 years ago.
Yeah, I remember seeing him on your Facebook.
Yeah.
Listen, I think we've covered a lot of cliches. I know it's
Yeah, we're at 2.5 hours, so
2.5 hours, and did we go from 1.5 to 2 to 2.5? Is that what we're doing? We keep stepping it up.
We do. We're gonna have to focus.
Yeah, this has been a joy. Like, man, I definitely I enjoy this every time we get together to talk about.
That's why we're making up for lost time, because we were like a month. We haven't done it in a month, so.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a matter of we got to do this more often. Part of that was my fault for being tied up for the month of April. Oh man, it's pretty crazy. But
yeah, it was.
Yeah, we got to do this again soon. I know we've got a lot of good topics. I've got to add some more to our list, but I just want to ask anybody who hears this, anybody who's listening to this, if you have an idea that you want to talk about, that you want us to discuss, or you want to give us input on, your thoughts on something that we said that you agree with or disagree with, please send us a message. Go into the comments, and we won't be offended if you disagree with something we're saying. We'd love to have conversation around it. At least I know I would. You would too, right, Josh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
because we're not
that
trying to have these theological discussions in a vacuum. We'll welcome
yeah,
challenge and pushback, and maybe it sparks a different curiosity. Somebody's like, yeah, well, what about, and then we can tackle all that too. Maybe
yeah,
imperfectly, but we'll do our best.
yeah, exactly. It's this isn't, again, I'm not your guru. I'm just a guy on a journey, and if sharing our journey or our ideas or thoughts helps you grow, take it, right? If something we say helps, I hope that's what we're doing here. I hope somebody's
Yeah.
gaining some sort of ability to improve themselves, even if it's
Me too.
taking what
Even
we're
if you just
saying.
maybe change the way people think about something, and that they take the time to think about it more. That's still a
Yeah,
benefit. I like it.
yeah, or even not even right. Hopefully, there's some sort of positive influence. Otherwise, I don't think we'd be sharing it. But just think about these things. That's right. Like these are the things that so many of us, and I believe there's more of us out there than we think. There's so many people out there who are
Hmm.
interested in these ideas. That's why our followers doubled in the last month, right? And it's I
Yeah.
hope if you get something out of this, do us a favor. Will you share this with somebody, right? Somebody who might enjoy it, right? And maybe they don't want to listen to the full 2.5 hours. Maybe they want to listen to one of the short 4-minute clips that comes out of it. But yeah, share this with somebody who this might be of value to. We'll ask you
Yeah. I like
that.
to think about this podcast becomes that thing like when you're not stuck in the rat race, paying bills, making dinner, and you zoom out like life has got to be bigger than this. What am I
Yeah,
missing? And then you stumble onto this type of conversation. You're like, whoa, yeah, that's what I've been asking about.
yeah,
That's what I've been thinking about.
yeah,
And, asking those questions, taking the time to sit and think. Not everybody is a philosopher, but I like to be conversational.
yeah. That's it. It's just, hey, this is where I am in my journey. These are some of the places I've been. Where are you? Where are you? What can
Exactly.
you share with me that might be of value? So, I always
Exactly.
appreciate our
I
time
really
together.
enjoy this. I look forward to next time, buddy.
Yeah, same here, man. Appreciate you.
I'm gonna go make me a steak.